Richard Pryor was one of the greatest comedians who ever lived. But behind his funny words was a life full of sadness, abuse, and struggle. Born on December 1, 1940, in Peoria, Illinois, Richard did not grow up in a normal home. His mother worked as a sex worker, and his father, Buck Pryor, was a violent man who sold drinks and ran illegal gambling. Richard grew up in his grandmother's brothel, surrounded by things a child should never see. He watched his parents fight, saw his mother's pain, and learned early that the world could be cruel. But even in this darkness, he found one light: laughter. He learned that when people laughed, they forgot their problems for a while. And that laughter became his escape from the sadness of his childhood. As he grew older, Richard discovered that he could make people laugh easily. He had a way of telling stories that felt real, because they came from his own pain. When he was on stage, people felt his truth. He didn't just tell jokes, he told stories about racism, poverty, drugs, and broken families. He made people laugh, but he also made them think. That is what made him so special. He wasn't afraid to talk about the things that others hid. But even as he made the world laugh, inside he carried deep wounds that never healed. In the 1960s and 70s, Richard Pryor became one of America's biggest comedy stars. He performed in nightclubs, appeared on television, and recorded comedy albums that sold millions. People loved him because he was raw and honest. His words were sharp, funny, and fearless. He didn't care who he offended. He spoke about race, politics, and everyday struggles in a way that felt real to everyone. But while his fame was growing, so were his personal problems. Richard had trouble controlling his anger and emotions. He used alcohol and drugs to escape from his pain, and that started to destroy him from the inside. Behind the fame, his personal life was in chaos. He married several times and had 7 children with different women. His relationships were full of love, but also full of fights and heartbreak. He wanted to be a good father, but his addiction made it hard. He once said that cocaine became his friend, and it almost destroyed him. In 1980, things reached a tragic point when Richard set himself on fire while high on drugs. He suffered terrible burns and nearly died. When he survived, many people thought it was a miracle. He later turned this painful experience into comedy, joking about it on stage, something only Richard Pryor could do. But behind those jokes was deep pain, and a man fighting for his life. After his near-death experience, Richard Pryor tried to rebuild his life. He returned to the stage, and audiences welcomed him with open arms. His honesty about his mistakes made people love him even more. He spoke openly about his drug use, his broken relationships, and his struggles with fame. People respected him because he never pretended to be perfect. But his health continued to get worse. Years of addiction and stress took their toll. During this time, Richard met Jennifer Lee, a woman who would later become his 6th and final wife. Their relationship was complicated, full of love, but also full of conflict. They married, divorced, and later remarried again. Jennifer said she loved Richard deeply and wanted to help him, but others in his family claimed she only cared about his money. When Richard's health started to fail after being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in the late 1980s, Jennifer became his main caretaker. She controlled who could see him and who couldn't. And that caused tension within the family. Even while sick, Richard's spirit didn't die. He continued to perform as long as he could, even in a wheelchair. Audiences still laughed with him, but they could also see his pain. In his final years, he talked about regret, about the things he wished he could fix, especially with his children. But life didn't give him that chance. On December 10, 2005, Richard Pryor passed away at the age of 65. His death broke the hearts of fans around the world. But his comedy and legacy lived on after Richard's death. His family began to fall apart. One of the most vocal people was his daughter, Rain Pryor, who had always loved her father deeply. Rain, who was also an actress and singer, admired her father's talent but hated how people misunderstood his story. She felt that after he died, the people around him were changing the truth about who he really was. The biggest conflict began with his widow, Jennifer Lee Pryor. Jennifer started speaking publicly about Richard's life. especially about his alleged bisexuality and his supposed affair with actor Marlon Brando, which had been mentioned by music legend Quincy Jones in an interview. When these claims spread online, Rain became furious. She said that her father was not alive to defend himself and that Jennifer was using his name for attention. Rain accused Jennifer of rewriting history to make herself look important. She also said that Jennifer treated her father badly when he was sick, controlling his money and isolating him from his children. This public fight shocked fans who had always seen Richard as a loving but tragic figure. Now, his family's arguments made people wonder what really happened behind closed doors. Rain said in interviews and social media posts that her father loved women and never spoke about being with men. She didn't deny that he was open-minded, but she believed the story about Marlon Brando was false. To her, it was a disrespectful lie that hurt his legacy. This fight between Rain and Jennifer turned into a long, emotional battle that revealed just how broken Richard's family had become after his death. The story of Richard Pryor and Marlon Brando continued to spread across media outlets. Many people didn't know what to believe. Quincy Jones's words had started a wildfire, and Jennifer Lee Pryor added more fuel by confirming that Richard had indeed been with Brando. She claimed that Richard was open about it during his life, and that his comedy had always reflected his wild, experimental side. Some fans accepted this version, saying it showed how fearless Richard really was. A man unafraid to live freely in a time when society judged harshly. But Rain Pryor never backed down. She stood firm in defending her father's dignity. In interviews, she said that Jennifer had a history of lying and using Richard's fame for money. She even accused Jennifer of manipulating her father when he was weak. Rain said that when her father died, she was heartbroken not only by his loss, but also by the fact that his name was being dragged through the mud. The public started to see this as more than a family fight. It became a debate about who owned Richard Pryor's story, his blood family, or the woman he married last. Despite the chaos, many fans continued to celebrate Richard's genius. They remembered the man who broke barriers for black comedians and told the truth about life through laughter. They saw the Brando scandal as just another example of how the media loves to twist the past. But for Rain, it wasn't just gossip, it was personal. She wanted her father remembered as a man of courage and honesty, not as a headline for shock value. Even with all the family drama, no one can deny the impact Richard Pryor had on comedy and culture. He changed how people talked about race, pain, and truth on stage. Comedians like Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, and Kevin Hart all say that Richard Pryor was their biggest influence. He taught them that being funny wasn't about pretending, it was about being real. His comedy albums won Grammys, his movies broke barriers, and his voice became one of the most powerful in American entertainment. Richard showed that laughter could be a weapon, a way to fight racism, injustice, and pain. He turned his trauma into art and made people face uncomfortable truths with a smile. Even after his death, his jokes still feel fresh because they come from real life. That's why his story continues to inspire so many people. But his legacy is also a reminder that genius often comes with deep pain. The laughter he gave the world was built on the suffering he carried since childhood. Today, Richard Pryor's story is both inspiring and heartbreaking. It's a story of a boy who grew up surrounded by violence and ended up making the whole world laugh. It's a story of a man who achieved everything but still couldn't escape his demons. And it's a story of a father whose children are still fighting to protect his memory. In the end. The truth about Richard Pryor is not just about what he did or didn't do, it's about what he meant to people. He wasn't perfect. He was human. He made mistakes, loved too hard, and fought battles that most people never understood. But through it all, he stayed real. His daughter Rain may still be fighting to protect his image, but one thing is clear: no scandal can erase his impact. His comedy changed lives, opened minds, and gave a voice to people who felt unheard. Richard Pryor's story reminds us that behind every laugh, there can be tears. Behind every joke, there can be pain. Yet even with all his flaws, he showed the world how powerful truth could be. Rain's fight for her father's legacy is more than a family feud. It's about protecting the memory of a man who taught the world to laugh at its own problems. As fans remember Richard today, they don't just see a comedian, they see a symbol of honesty, courage, and survival. He made people laugh, but more importantly, he made them feel. His daughter's love, even through anger, shows that the truth about Richard Pryor is not just about scandal or fame, it's about humanity. After Richard Pryor's death, his 7 children were left to carry not only his legacy but also the heavy memories of their father's complicated life. Each of them had a different experience growing up with him. Some remembered the laughter, while others remembered the pain. His daughter, Rain, was one of the few who spoke openly about her father's good and bad sides. She said that while her father wasn't perfect, he always made her feel loved when he was present. Rain also admitted that Richard's addictions made him disappear from their lives for long periods, and that hurt deeply. But what made their story even more painful was the conflict that followed his death. The legal battle over Richard's estate divided the family. Some of his children felt that Jennifer Lee Pryor, his last wife, had too much control over his image, films, and money. They accused her of profiting from his legacy while cutting them out of decisions. Jennifer, on the other hand, said she was protecting Richard's name and his work from being misused. The fight became public, and fans who loved Richard were heartbroken to see the people he loved most turning against each other. Despite the conflict, Rain kept using her voice to remind people of who her father really was, a man of deep emotion, laughter, and truth. She said, "My father was not a saint, but he was honest. That honesty is what made him beautiful." For her, the fight was never about money, it was about respect. She wanted people to remember the artist, not the scandals. Her love for her father showed that even through years of hurt, there was still forgiveness. When people talk about the greatest comedians of all time, Richard Pryor's name always comes first. His style changed comedy forever. Before him, most comedians told safe jokes, funny stories that didn't offend anyone. Richard broke that rule. He brought his life, pain, and race to the stage. He talked about growing up poor, about being black in America, about being addicted, and even about setting himself on fire. He used his real experiences as his material. No one had done that before him. Comedians like Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, Kevin Hart, and many others call him their teacher. Chris Rock once said, "Before Pryor, comedians told jokes. After Pryor, they told the truth." Richard gave other comedians permission to be real, to turn their pain into performance. His influence is still seen in stand-up comedy today, where truth-telling has become the heart of humor. Beyond comedy, Richard also inspired filmmakers and writers. He showed that stories about black lives could be funny, tragic, and honest, all at once. Movies like Harlem Nights, JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, and Stir Crazy blended laughter with lessons about life, race, and survival. Even when Hollywood didn't understand him, he never changed his voice. He refused to hide who he was, and that bravery made him a hero for many artists who came after him. Hollywood never really knew what to do with Richard Pryor. On one hand, he was a box office star, a man who could make millions laugh. On the other, he was unpredictable, rebellious, and outspoken. Studios loved his talent, but feared his honesty. In the 1970s,